Hello and welcome to the Jozu Gamers podcast with me, James.
And me, Erik.
And if you are interested in Japan, games, or a bit of both, you are in the right place. So today we're going to be looking at a range of gaming topics, including Erik's new game, our thoughts on remakes and remasters, as well as a look at one of my all-time favourites. But before all that, let's delve into what is quite literally a hot topic, and that is the Japanese summer, which we are enduring currently. So how are you enjoying the heat these days, Erik?
Oh, I hate it. I'm from LA, so I'm not very good with the humid weather here.
Yeah, I mean, that's the real killer, I think, is the humidity more than the temperature itself. It's sort of one of those phrases people always say, oh, it's like a dry heat, it's okay. And you think it's very annoying until you have been somewhere like here, and then, it's much worse when it's very humid. So do listen to those people, they're right. Yeah. But so as someone who's lived here for a while, do you have any sort of tips for people? So if people are visiting in the summer, or if they do end up moving here, what's your sort of recommendations for people to survive the summer in Japan?
The way I survive is I just wear shorts, flip-flops, and t-shirts, but that's not really the normal fashion trend for Japanese people. They're way more fashion forward, so they would wear long sleeve and long pants. And when it's like 35 Celsius outside and it's sweating balls, like they'll still wear the same thing. And I'm like, how do you do this? Just wear what you're comfortable, honestly. Like, you can go to Uniqlo, you can go to GU, you can go to like a lot of places and get like the Airism. They got the really cool undershirts, and they also have the regular shirts too that are nice and breezy. There is that one jacket that like construction workers kind of buy. They have like a little fan, an electric fan.
Yeah.
So those are nice. They are kind of bulky.
Have you ever actually worn one?
No, but I know how good they are just because I hear a lot about it, and I have a relative who also is in construction here in Japan. So, he wears that stuff, and if they're willing to wear that in the heat of summer, and this is a whole jacket, right? Like it's already hot. Why would you wear a jacket? But if they're gonna wear that and it has a fan, I'm gonna assume that they know what they're doing, and they like that and will suffer through it, right? I guess they're not suffering if the fan is blowing in.
Yeah, or at least they're suffering a little less.
Yeah.
But how does summer compare to, like, we sort of touched on this briefly, but you're from LA, and LA is well known as being not particularly a cold place itself. So how does it compare, the summers of LA compared to the summers of Osaka?
I haven't been in an LA summer in a long time, so it's all from memories, and probably an ideal. It's like, oh, in LA the summer's like this. It's dry. It doesn't go past. It can go to 100 Fahrenheit sometimes.
What's that in Celsius for the non-Americans?
What is that in Celsius? 38.
30. Okay, yeah. That's pretty hot.
Still rare. Yeah. Those are very, very rare, and so there is like a range. Like, don't quote me on it, but the range is very comfortable. It's just from winter to summer. But how about where are you from, and how's the weather different from here though?
So in the UK, the summer is a little warm, but it's not anywhere near as warm as here. I think at the moment they're having quite a cool July, so I think I saw on the news it was like 20, 22 or something. But that's abnormally cool. Usually, usually you get a couple of weeks where it sort of just gets over 30 in some places, but it's not as humid as Japan, and generally it's like mid-20s is the sort of warm days, and you get some rain. You don't get as much rain as obviously we've just sort of had the what they call rainy season in Japan. So you don't get anything like that in the UK, but you get little spots of rain, and it's not. Yeah, the lack of humidity is such a big difference because when it is hot, I really enjoy rainy days in the UK because it just makes everywhere feel so cool. But in here, when it rains, it's awful. You just want to like I don't know. It's unbearable because it's just so humid, and you can't open the windows and things because it rains really heavily. So you're just sort of trapped in. I mean, obviously you can use air conditioning, but not every room has air conditioning. So yeah, it's quite different. I mean, winter is almost exactly the same as Osaka, except where I'm from in the UK is a little bit more snowy, but like temperature-wise, it's roughly the same. It's just summer here is insane. Okay, so well, with that literally hot topic explored, let's delve into a sort of a slightly less hot but perpetually relevant one, and that is game remakes and remasters, which, as all of you listening, I'm sure, are aware, is a. I mean, it's not a new thing. They've been doing remastering, remaking games for a long time. There've been some really good ones over the years, some less good ones. But it's it's a thing people debate about, and I thought it'd be interesting to sort of get our take on that. So we'll start with you, Eric. So what's your sort of take on just as a concept, remaking and remastering older games?
I like remasters or remakes, but it has to be done properly. I don't think having the exact game just remastered into a different console or different, like in the PC or something like that, is the best way of going about it. If you're going to remake it, you're going to add new things to it. That's still canon. That still adds more value to the game itself. If it devalues it, like there's opposing opinions, right? Some people want the exact same game. Some people want more value for it because if I already had the game, I already played through it. If I'm gonna play through it again, really, it's just different graphics. Right? I don't want to buy a new game just because it has better graphics, quote unquote. Right?
Sure.
If it's extra value, if there's extra value in it, like they add a new like stage or something like that, I think that would be great because I don't want to spend an extra like $30-$40 just to buy the same exact game, just to say that I have the same exact game. I'm not a collector
Sure.
like that.
Yeah,
But,
yeah,
don't
yeah.
look at my Steam library. I say that, but don't look at my Steam library.
But how about
What?
as a so sort of that sounds like sort of from the point of view of someone who like already has played these games before. If you're going to buy it again, you want something new. But what about sort of the like younger audience? So let's say a game that came out like 20 years ago that was really well received at the time, but people who are like teenagers now weren't alive, and it's like either really hard to play now because of backwards compatibility, or it's just really dated and just looks too old for them to try, and the interface is very old. Like, so as a sort of update of an old game for a new audience, what do you think of it from that standpoint? Is it sort of a similar opinion, or do you think differently from that viewpoint?
For new players, I think it's a great way of getting them in. It's a lot of these new games, or rather, I wouldn't say new games, but there's a lot of really long-standing IPs, and so it's kind of hard to get into. Like, for example, if you're talking about Final Fantasy, everybody starts talking about when you're like our age. It's like, oh, we played 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way up to like 14, 15. You know, and then you have like the younger generations like, oh, you talk about this, but then I only know about 13. I only know about the MMO, right? So having these remakes is a great way of kind of getting newer players into the IP to kind of understand where everything stands in terms of storyline and stuff like that. I think that's a great way if you want to put it that way, yeah.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I've got a kind of mixed view on remakes and remasters. So I kind of agree with you to a certain extent. It feels a bit pointless to buy something again unless I'm getting something new. But saying that, I have obviously bought games that have been remastered or like reported. So I can kind of see. Jeez.
Exactly. I've been holding that in for like 5 minutes.
It was so loud. Okay, I'll start again. So yeah, so I have kind of a mixed view on these kind of games. I from the one hand, I agree with your point that it seems a bit pointless to re-buy something you already own just because it's got like a new coat of paint on it. But I have obviously done that. I've bought games, that have been remastered or reported. Especially reports a lot, just because it saves the hassle of having to get out an old console or. You can use emulators on the computer if it's older than a certain age, which is one way I do play older games. But I, generally speaking, kind of agree with you that it's a bit pointless. Unless, as you say, there's some new feature, or if it's really old and it's like almost unplayable now, that's when that's one situation where I'm kind of behind remakes and remasters. But that said, I would much prefer that effort, money, and energy to go into something new. Apologies, that was a message. I'll say that again. I would much rather something. I'd much rather they put that energy into something new rather than putting the money and time and effort into remaking things that already exist. It's a bit like films as well, where there's a kind of trend of like remaking or rebooting a lot of old films, and sometimes they're really good, sometimes they do a great job, and it's really nice to kind of see that old story in a new way. And it's the same thing with games. Sometimes it's kind of fun to kind of relive that old game, but it doesn't look so old. But if I had to choose between a new game and a remaster, a new game would win every time. But that said, I have bought many. I do think there's a place for them, especially kind of keeping like big titles going over, that otherwise might be forgotten by younger generations just because they're so old that they haven't aged well, or they're really hard to play on modern hardware. So yeah, I'm a bit on the fence about it overall, but I think there's a place for them is probably what I would say. But yeah, do you have any further thoughts sort of on that?
No, I think you've covered pretty much everything. We both covered pretty much everything that can be said about it.
Sure, okay.
There could be more. No, I don't.
Oh, okay. Well, I think with that covered, I think that's a good point for us to have a quick break. So join us shortly for news on Erik's newest board game purchase, which I was lucky to play the other day, and also to hear about one of my all-time favourite games, which I'm very excited to talk to you all about. So we'll see you shortly. Okay, welcome back. So, Erik, why don't you tell us about your newest game purchase?
Yep. So my friend came from America and is visiting Japan, and as a small gift, he bought me the game called Steam Up. It's a dim sum game, if you know what that is. Basically, it really gets to my kind of pulls my heartstrings as a Chinese person, but it's basically you're during your turn you're getting tokens. Use those tokens to buy the dim sum baskets, the Steam baskets, and those baskets will fill up your character board, your animal board, and they will give you points. And at the end of the game, whoever has the most hardy points, they call it hardy points, you are the winner. There are cards and stuff that kind of like mix up the gameplay, so there is quite a bit of replayability, and it's not very complex. On game on Board Game Geek, it's what 1.57 complexity rating, 2 to 5 players. It is 40 minutes minimum for sure. Like the box does say 40 to 60, and it definitely does go up to at a minimum 40 minutes, just because. Wait, I guess if you're really quick about it, you can do it in 30 minutes, but it's always a certain amount of baskets, and the setup also takes a little bit of time and stuff like that. So overall, it was a great game. I played it, what, 2 times on Monday once we got it, and I just read through the rule book real quickly, and I already figured out the rules. So it was very simple to learn and very simple to teach too. What did you think about it?
Yeah, I think it was fun. I think it's one of these games that, like you say, it's really simple, but I think when you first look at it, you see all these different parts. Like you've got all the little like rubber food items and the baskets and the cards, and you've got the different animals. So and you've got the die as well that you can roll. So it seems very complex, but as you say, actually, when you play it, it's really easy. I think it's a bit like. It's not quite. I was going to say it's a bit like Seven Wonders, where it's like a bit of a pain to explain, but it's not actually that hard. But I think it's probably a lot easier than Seven Wonders. But it's kind of there's a lot of moving parts to it, but it is actually really easy when you play it. So it's one of those games that I say one of those. Most games are like that, but it's like easier to learn by playing. But I enjoyed it. I mean, I won, which is always a plus. But it was, it's fun. I think the theme works really well. So all your like player characters are the different animals from the Chinese New Year. So I actually played as my own, which is Rat. So those of you who are bored can work out what year I was born. And it was fun. They all have different abilities. So the Rat was like a gambler. So you had this ability where you could roll the dice and get different effects depending what number you rolled. Sometimes they're pretty useless, but occasionally, which I got a few times, you could get basically free points, which I'm pretty sure helped me win, because I got 2 or 3 of those. But it was cool, and the design's really nice. The little food rubber things were, really detailed, considering it's... I don't know how much it costs, but usually, board games, like £40-50 or something. So yeah, it was pretty good. But it's certainly one I hope we continue to play at the board game night anyway. How about you? Now that you've played it a couple of times, like what are your thoughts on it as a player?
Playing the games is pretty simple. Everybody has their own animal, but it's not as complicated as like Root or Villainous, where everybody's kind of playing their own thing. You think the point difference for each animal is like pretty big, but it's really not. So it's a very decently balanced game. The animals don't make that much of a difference because they each have their own abilities. So it's very much like how efficient you are in terms of like getting the dim sum that you are targeting and blocking other people by rotating the Lazy Susan so that they can't buy it, right? Other than that, as a player, the only thing that I would probably complain about, which is not really a complaint, is the feast zones, because you can only buy the Steam baskets that are in your feast zone, but it's very like there's small white lines that are on the outside of the circle that kind of determines where your feast zone is. So it is in the beginning it is kind of difficult to see where it is, but once you play along, you just remember it's like, okay, it's here. And so, but in the beginning it's a little bit like convoluted because it's just like a little white line and be like, okay, you can only buy it within this zone here, and then people just have to remember it's there because it's just like really tiny white lines.
Yeah.
I do use the little animals to kind of mark where you are. So I just use your own animal marker and I just put it there so you kind of remember where the feast zone is. Other than that, it's relatively simple.
Just for
Not really
people
a lot
who
of complaints.
haven't seen the game, the feast zones are basically little segments of the. So you've got one of those round spinning tables like you get at the Lazy Susan thing, and yeah, you've got like a little wedge basically, depending on the number of players, and you can only buy the dim sum that land in that segment. So it's, but yeah, I think that's probably the only thing I would say as well. I think is it's a bit when it's your first game, it's probably quite annoying to see. But as you say, you sort of just remember it and don't think about it after a while, unless you're the cow, in which case then you can buy outside your zone anyway. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. I think it was. It's always nice to do a new game. We often play the same games at the board game night a lot, so it's always fun when there's a new game sort of coming up. Although Bonanza is still the best game we play, which for people who don't know, Erik doesn't enjoy, but I enjoy.
I think Liam doesn't even want to play it as much as you do.
Yeah,
And it's
so
his game.
Liam's our friend. It's his game he brings, and I basically force him to play it every week. But it's good. It's a lot of fun. It's always very close. But maybe we can do it. We can talk about Bonanza sometime, since we've got differing opinions on it. That could be interesting. But we'll save that for a future episode. But finally, for today's episode, I would quite like to talk about one of my all-time favorite games, which I've been playing since I was 7, so almost 20 years I've been playing. And that is Creative Assembly's Rome Total War. And that is the first one, not the second one. So yeah, it's basically a real-time strategy game. I mean, if you're familiar with the Total War series, you know how these games work. You have a sort of grand map, which is in this case Europe and bits of Asia and North Africa, sort of corresponding to the where civilizations that the Romans would have been in contact with were, and you control your armies and you can move them around and you build up your cities and you can sort of manage the economy and things from that side. You have diplomats that you can send to different factions and do diplomacy, although it's quite an old game and the diplomacy is a bit funky sometimes. And you even have spies and assassins and different things like that. And then the battles themselves, so that the grand map is turn-based, so every faction has a turn, and a turn is supposed to represent 6 months, and so 2 turns a year, basically. And then you, if you start a battle, so if you attack an army or if you're sieging a city and you decide to assault, it sort of zooms in, and you go to a real-time map for the actual battle, and that's where you control. So it's not quite like Age of Empires or something where you control individual soldiers, you control units. So it's a bit more like a sort of, how would you say, sort of general kind of perspective. So you control units and you have different types of units like spearmen and swordsmen, heavy infantry and light infantry and archers and things. And you can position them and order them, but so they'll do what you say, but there is some situations like some less disciplined units might charge without orders, and units have morale. So if they get charged by cavalry from behind, they'll often run away, and you can't control them anymore unless you can kind of bring them back round. So it's quite a simple game because it's quite old, but it's got a lot of depth to it. And the reason I started playing it was because I must have been 7 or 8, because I was in year 4, which any UK listeners or viewers, depending what platform you're on, will know is year 4 is when you learn about the Romans at school. So I was learning about the Romans at school at the time, and it was my favourite subject, and it's a subject I still enjoy. In fact, I even got a notebook next to me where I'm doing some studying of Roman citizenship, which is a topic completely irrelevant to this podcast. But yeah, so it's a subject I really enjoyed at the time. So my mum sort of noticed I was enjoying that, so she saw this game in a shop and bought it for me. And it was great because, I mean, along with the game aspect, there's tons of information they've put in there. I mean, it's obviously not all completely accurate, but for a 7-year-old child, it's certainly more than enough to kind of whet your appetite and get you interested in things like the different kinds of units. They have little events that go through the campaign, like that sort of correspond to real discoveries or innovations of the time. So things like you get a notification saying, "Oh, people have come up with Stoic philosophy now," and things which match. And it has like the wonders of the ancient world you can capture, and you get bonuses, and it has information about them, things like that. So it was, for me as a child, sort of getting into that, it was really fun. And then just as a game, like, the gameplay is really solid, so I've just continued to enjoy playing it since. So I'm assuming it's not something you've played, Eric?
No, I've not played Rome. I've not played Rome Total War. I've never had a computer until I was like high school, so, and by then I was just deep into like RuneScape.
Oh yeah.
And like it was a lot of free games for me, like RuneScape, Neopets. What else? Adventure Quest. Like games like these I didn't have, so it's very interesting. I'll see like a lot of people like over their shoulders and they're playing these type of games, and I'm like, what is that? But then I don't have that kind of money to buy it, so I'm just like, I can't go look into it. Otherwise, I'd just be too jealous. And then it is what it is. But did you ever finish the game as a kid?
Yeah, many times. So to finish, well, finish is a bit of a. It depends what you mean by finish, because there's kind of 3 ways you can win a campaign. So if you're doing what's called a short campaign, you have to take 25 cities or towns, 25 regions, and then you've got to destroy or outlive specific factions. If you're doing the long campaign, you've got to capture 50 regions, and including Rome, and then you'll win. And then once you've done those, so every time so if you start with a short campaign, you complete it. It gives you the option, do you want to carry on and do the long campaign? And you can click yes. And then when you complete the long campaign, you can carry on playing basically until you've conquered every region in the map. I can't remember, there's like a lot. Because it goes from, you've got Britain in the northeast, goes sort of to modern, like partway through Russia, and you've got all of Turkey in the Near East and things. So it's, but I've completed it, I think, with most factions. I think there's some I haven't bothered with because they're quite difficult, or some are a bit tedious as well. So Parthia is very tedious because your economy is so terrible at the beginning. But I've won not the like full map, but I've won. I think I've won at least the short campaign as Parthia. But I completed it several times over the years.
How's the replayability? So if you were to play the short campaign, I guess you would just choose different regions to conquer, or is there like a RNG aspect of it that kind of, even if you're doing the same region, and you're doing the same steps, there's a chance that you might not be able to conquer it?
So the replayability comes from like a few areas. So one is that you have different factions, and different factions can train like completely different units. The factions are kind of grouped into kind of like groups of similar ones. So you've got like the barbarian factions, which kind of have similar units with some little differences. You obviously the Romans. There's 3 Roman families that you can play as, and they end up having a civil war at some point. So that's the point where you can take over Rome. And you've got like the Hellenistic factions, or the Greek-ish factions, which tend to be spearmen and phalanxes and things. So you can even get like elephants and things if you're Carthage or the Seleucid Empire, things like that. So you get different kinds of units. So that's one way it's different. And then depending which faction you play as, you also have different factions around you. So you tend to the starting point's quite different for each faction. So depending who you start with, you're gonna have different neighbors. And you can kind of play in different styles. Like you could be really aggressive. You can try and build peace, but I said the diplomacy is a bit funky. So you tend to kind of be an ally with someone for like 50 turns, and then they'll suddenly attack you for no reason because the AI is a bit dumb. But you could do different things. But one thing that's kind of kept me playing is that there's quite a lot of mods for it these days, which add like new features. So like that'll be different factions, or you can get ones that there's a really good one for the. So the game's been remastered. So there's a remastered and original version, but there's a mod for the both remastered and original. Well, it's two mods for the original, but they combined it in the remastered, which like makes the game really real. Well, not really realistic, but a lot more realistic. So it's like very historically accurate, which is kind of a fun way to do it. There's I'm playing one now, which is interesting, where you if you conquer a region, you can't train your own type of units there. It depends what culture is prominent. So you if you conquer like a Hellenistic place, you'll be able to train Hellenistic units there, even if you're the Romans. But like you could try and build up Roman culture there, and then you would be able to start training Roman units instead. But that's kind of interesting because like now I've got this thing where I've got different regions of the map where I've got different kinds of armies, which is kind of fun. So yeah, that's these days a lot of the replayability is coming from the modding scene for me. But also there's an element of nostalgia. I mean, started playing it when I was in primary school, so that's all obviously a factor.
You're still live streaming the hospital game, yeah?
Yes, yeah. I'm still doing Theme Hospital. I was tempted to do Rome Total War, but I'd need to check if it would work. It would also be quite a long series. It would also take a lot of self-restraint to only play once a week if I get into it. So I'm not sure. I have thought about it as an option. I might do a series on Rome Total War. But yeah, I'm still doing. I can't remember what level I'm on now, but I think I'm around halfway through Theme Hospital.
Yeah, the self-restraint thing is an issue for me for Hades too. Like I can't just play 2 hours a week.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is quite good for the playing Theme Hospital, because basically I do like a level per stream, and a level, like suddenly now it's getting harder, lasts around an hour or just over an hour or something, so it works quite nicely. It's not super addictive that I'm like, I want to play this every day. Like playing it once a week is quite nice. So yeah, I don't know. I'd be tempted to do Rome Total War, but I would have to, I'd have to have some self-restraint. But I'm in the middle of playing it, not on stream anyway at the moment, so I'll wait till I finish this campaign at least anyway. But well, I think anyway. So I think that's enough on Rome Total War. But it is a game I definitely recommend checking out. There is a remaster if you don't want to play something that's so old, which I think was reasonably well done. It looks pretty good visually. The interface is a bit weird in places, but generally it's good. They tried to make it like the modern Total War games interface-wise, but the actual gameplay is pretty much as I remember. I mean, it still has a lot of the quirks of the old one, like some of the pathfinding is a bit weird, especially in cities. But it's a fun game, and I think it's, if you enjoy the Total War series, definitely check it out, because it's kind of represents, it was like the peak of, like that and Medieval 2 are kind of the peak of that era of Total War, which is sort of the classic era. And if you just like strategy games in general, it's fun. It's kind of simple but deep at the same time. It's not like insane, like there are some like super in-depth real-time strategy games that are really hard to get into. It's quite accessible, but there's depth there if you want it. So, but yeah, I think that's probably enough on that for 1 week, and yeah, we'll probably leave it there. So thank you to everyone for listening, and thank you to Erik for powering through his cold. So apologies if, well, we've tried to cut them out in the edit, but if any sniffles have made it in, sorry about that, but you know, you can't really help being ill. But yeah, hope you get well soon. And yeah, that brings us to the end of another episode of the Jozu Gamers podcast with me, James.
And me, Erik.
Okay, so be sure to follow us on our social media platforms at Jozu Gamers, and we will see you next time. Bye bye.